6, 7. I can't even turn the pages fast enough. 8. One packet. 1, 2. Can't turn that packet. 4 pages there. Another 1, 2, 3, 4. That packet. Then we got 1, 2, 3. Guys, we need to talk. All right. So what's going on? Why are my papers on the floor? Well, my client is in trouble. They're in trouble, and it has to do with advertising, and it has to do with branding, and it has to do with promotion. So today, I want to talk about the best practices of what to do in tough legal situations, which may involve you or may involve your client or both. Let's do it. All right. Without further ado, got some pro tips. Sorry, guys, I got a cough. All right. My client's in trouble. What do I do? Advertising, lawsuit, digital market advertising. Here is the solution. So as usual, I got a Google document because they're my favorite. And I don't know why I'm so calm depending upon all this stuff that's going on. There's a bunch of papers on my floor now. I mean, look at this. Look, there's a bunch of papers on my floor. Whatever. So I'm going to go over through some bullet points because I have been in a similar situation that I was in today. Excuse me. Depending upon the industry, depending upon the clientele, depending upon whatever type of advertising solution or digital solution or client management that you're doing, there might be a point in time when your client gets into trouble. Whether it's legal trouble or they said something that they weren't supposed to say or slander or whatever, it's really more inevitable, especially in this day and age. So if you're doing any digital advertising or any digital service that is related to all the stuff I got going on here or clients potentially being exposed and getting in trouble, well, you're in luck. That's what we're going to go over today. Basically, marketing, in advertising, there's going to be a point where something that you say is going to offend somebody. It's going to be wrong. And it depends where you're at on the spectrum as far as how wrong you did something. Some things will be your fault. Some things won't be your fault. And a lot of it, unfortunately, has to do with perspective and politics rather than the real facts. So I want to give some pro tips on what I've learned because I feel like it's valuable. It's not a subject that's talked about a lot. And I think anyone would take away some good stuff from this, regardless of the industry. So first key point that I want to make is, I'm not a lawyer, okay? I can't answer every single question. I can't give sound legal advice. I'm now a lawyer. I'm also not a speller. I'm not a lawyer, guys. Don't rely on me for sound legal advice. You cannot take this advice really without doing your due diligence, your research, all that good stuff. And you may want to consult a lawyer, which I will talk about at later on in this video, and when and kind of how you identify those times to do that. So first and foremost, remain calm. Usually in every circumstance that I've been involved in on, something going wrong or the client being in trouble legally, I usually get notified by the client. If we, certain things that we've been involved with at the agency is advertising things that we weren't supposed to because of brand guidelines. That happens. That's more on the lighter end, slap on the wrist part of the spectrum. That happens from time to time. Certain brands and franchises that you advertise for have specific advertising requirements, and they're supposed to provide documentation and rules and guidelines for you to submit to, maybe ad compliance, brand standards, so on and so forth. That could be something where your client gets into advertising trouble. Now, as far as a lawsuit, I've been involved in those as well. Those are more messy. That usually has to do with things I've been involved with. Unfortunately, is plagiarism. I myself did not plagiarize, but we did have incidents where we saw plagiarism occur, and it was not caught. It does happen when you write content and you do marketing. You do leave yourself exposed. Um, Taught me a lot the hard way, and I wish someone had brought some of these tips and things like that to my attention. So first and foremost, those number one, remain calm. You're going to figure it out. It's going to be okay. And even though that you're watching this video now, it's like start thinking about these things as more. If you treat them like inevitabilities, you'll be able to remain calm more. And a lot depends on the industry that you're involved with as well. Some industries are more subjective to lawsuits and claims like that than others. So think about that way, and then anticipate. I'll put this again here. Anticipate the inevitable. If you take the proper precautions on marketing, especially for other clients, then you're going to be in better shape. Now, know that you can be held responsible. You can be held responsible for certain things that you put out there. Um, Not only would you lose the business of the client, but it's really, really dependent upon the local guidelines, laws, so on and so forth. So if you are not necessarily served, but the client alerts you that they do have an advertising problem or advertising lawsuit, and sometimes it's impossible to anticipate everything. You kind of have to deal with it as it comes. You can have the million best practices you possibly can, but um, it's impossible to anticipate everything. Just kind of know that there's a bunch of unknowns that you don't know. Um, so do your research, right? Let's say you're getting into some situation where you do have an issue with a client or they have an issue with advertising or something like that. Do your research. Within this, you want to gain all the facts. You want copies of documents. If, depending upon the brand or whatever, you want the original document. Okay. Whether it's via email, that's fine. You can print out copies. I recommend, even though I'm very much embedded in digital, print it out, make notes, annotate it. I'm going to say, if electronic, print out and annotate. Never mark up the original documents. Just don't. If you were ever served for anything, or your client was written a letter, a cease and desist letter, or a whatever it is from their franchise or brand, if they were actually mailed a letter for whatever reason, do not mark up the original documents. Make copies of everything. Make copies of everything. Store the originals separately, because you need those for fortification and proof. When you start annotating things, um, it just becomes less formal and less legitimate. Make copies of everything. Copies of everything. I wrote competitors here. So if you're served something, let's look on the lighter end of the spectrum. I'm going to say determine the spectrum of severity. Minor infraction versus major infraction lawsuit. You want to determine the severity. Then, and actually, this would probably happen a little bit later on. First, you got to do the research. You got to get all the facts, get the copies of the documents, analyze the documents, so on and so forth. Something that I find that is pretty good is to see if you can emulate any competitors trying to do the same thing. Because I've had instances where the original, let's say, the original manufacturer of a specific franchise did not specifically state clear guidelines and rules until after the fact. So I was able to pinpoint other competitors of ours that shared in the same franchise, that was actually at fault as well. And that helped mitigate the whole restriction and deadline. So see if you can find other examples of people or businesses that are, supposedly infringing on the rules as well. And this will help you better understand what the education is out there for the guidelines and the rules. And no, the instances I've been involved with were really not to my knowledge or knowing. It was more of the client's responsibility, as this one is. But it's still very important to get educated on the local legalities, rules, compliance restrictions, brand guideline restrictions, so on and so forth, because it's very, very important. Yes. Okay. Then, excuse me. If you can gain anything from competitors, or searching for competitors if they're doing something similar, that's just a little more ammunition in your bucket. So consult the team. If you have an internal team that can give areas of expertise on the matter, consult them. You know, that's great if you do. If you have a company, a colleague, reach out to people in that industry if you can to um, get any free legal advice or slash advice in general. You know, you want to get as much free advice as you possibly can, but make sure the make sure the advice is legit. I'm fortunate enough excuse me, I'm fortunate enough to have individuals that have been through the industry, multiple industries, and specifically to one niche for a long period of time. They've seen a lot of things happen. They've seen a lot of companies that we work for promote good best practices, and have been on the other side of companies that haven't done the or the best practices, best business practices ever. So the experience pays off. Um, so if you have a team, consult with them. Don't just try and take it upon yourself to figure out the situation, because there are elements that you don't know. So consult as much free, legitimate advice as possible. And again, I'm going to make this a little more boring. I'm not a lawyer. I cannot give um, legal advice that you should follow. Right. So we talked about consulting the team. This is a big one here. Understand your responsibility. Oftentimes, when something happens, whether it's in advertising or in business or whatever, determine what your responsibility is. Um, Sometimes, when doing your research and reading through the documentation, you're not the business. If the business withheld information that you didn't know about specific to that industry, that's not necessarily your fault. It shouldn't automatically be your fault. It really shouldn't. The business is ultimately at fault because they are responsible for their advertising. Now, they can hold you accountable, and depending upon the offense, the legality, the spectrum of where you're at, you can definitely be held accountable. However, it should not be automatically your fault. Understand the scope of things. Like, for example, if it's website infractions and you're responsible for the website or something on the website, then you may be partly responsible for the fix or solution. Usually, when clients present this kind of stuff to you in a marketing objective, they are ultimately the ones responsible because they're the business. They're responsible for their advertising. But usually, what I see is we're responsible for the solutions. Even though we did not cause the problem, we're responsible for helping it get resolved, right? And that's typically what I see the level of responsibility at. Um, it shouldn't automatically be your fault. I'm going to say stay away from the blame game. Don't blame the clients. Don't blame yourself. Think about, instead, be solution orientated. You want to be solution orientated first. Nobody needs, and it can get very political. It can get very finger pointy. Nobody needs pointing the finger, this and that, blah 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 blah. Just be very very attentive with listening, very attentive on what you think solutions are, so on and so forth. Another key point. I'm going to talk about that key point later. Hold that thought. So that's understanding your responsibility. Are you going to be the one to help? Are you going to be the person / company to help find a solution, fix the problem, fix the message, consult legal, advise on compliance / brand guidelines, and oftentimes clients will lean on you, especially if you are experienced in the industry. Clients will lean on you to be that brand guideline and compliance advocates, to not lead them astray. Clients may not always know. So it's important to understand exactly what you're marketing and where. Different states, example, different states have different guidelines for advertising in specific verticals or industries, right? Some industries I've worked with, automotive and real estate, there are advertising restrictions. Digital is more of the wild, wild west. Sorry, guys. Digital is more of the wild, wild west, but it's still important to understand what those brand guidelines and compliance restrictions are before you get any client, especially with new verticals. Make sure you do some research on this. It should be part of your initial client research, because that's going to help solidify the client relationship as you're looking out for their best interest as the advertiser or the service provider. Okay. So we talked about understanding your responsibility. Remember, it's not always your fault, and that determine how you're going to do it. Are you the cause of the problem? Did excuse me, your negligence cause the problem? That's the worst spot to be in. Did negligence on your part cause the problem? Can you help find a solution? Can you fix the problem? Can you fix the message? Whatever it is. You want to, in understanding your responsibility, you want to determine the spectrum of severity. You want to determine whether this is a minor infraction or a major infraction, right? Minor infraction example would be, violating brand guidelines, first offense. A lot of brands give free passes. They do, because they understand not everything works in a perfect system. It makes sense that things are going to be led astray at some point or another. Another minor infraction would be finding other examples of competitors that are doing similar things and establishing precedents of non-harsh consequences. So if somebody else is doing something similar, whether it be a pricing restraint or something like that, and it's more commonplace, doesn't mean it's right. But if you can find other examples that are out there, and typically you can find them pretty easily, it usually relates to a more minor infraction. Okay. A major infraction, major infraction examples would be plagiarism, repeated violation of brand guidelines, second, third, fourth. I'm so sorry, guys. Second, third, fourth, fifth, etc. It's happened. And then, all the other ones that you learn about in school, slander, discrimination, etc. It can happen. It can happen. Fraud can happen. Now, that's not more on the advertising side. Usually, on the advertising side, especially if you're doing marketing, is plagiarism or repeated violation of brand guidelines. That's usually what I see. Another would be repeated violation of local, uh, county, state law guidelines. That's a big one too. There's a lot of trials and tribulations there that happen. When COVID happened, with keeping up with the CDC and keeping up with all the mandates, especially for local business, it was tough. I'm not gonna lie, it was tough. We had to be constantly switching, constantly be agile, constantly looking at the CDC website to make sure we're in adherence. So the local business advertising is tough that way. So those are some examples of major infractions. Um, Hopefully that helps. Now, finally, action plan. Once you gather all this research, this is like the number one thing. Do not make any changes without consulting key stakeholders or attorneys, depending upon the spectrum of severity. You know, if you got a minor violation, consult powers that be. Yeah, consult the powers that be. A major violation, go right to an attorney. Don't even mess around. Just go right to an attorney. You know, do your due diligence as much as you can, but attorneys cost big money. You know, and that's what they are paid to do. So be in weary of that. That's why people don't really want to do that. You want to set up as much protection as possible, not only for their business, but for your business too. If worst comes to worst, you want to make sure that your personal gains are well insulated, and your personal finances and legality is well insulated. The importance of LLCs and limited liability corps are really, really important, not only for taxes, but for general business use as well. Being a sole proprietor makes you very, very exposed. There are other benefits depending upon the situation, but it does leave a lot of exposure because you yourself can be liable. So, and then finally, I have attorney time. So, no one to consult an attorney, and it's really about these major violations. If you had repeated offenses or repeated brand guidelines or something that is um, clearly indicative of advertising restrictions, so on and so forth, then a consult an attorney. Another time to consult an attorney, maybe when it wouldn't be illegal. Example of non-legal time, consult an attorney. Maybe you did advertising or services, but the client signed other documentation with a specific vendor / franchise, did not inform you. In this instance, this is actually very similar to what happened today. We were unaware, as the advertising partner for this client, we are unaware of the contract that they signed that had certain restrictions on the marketing, and we weren't made aware of those issues. So because of that, it's caused a bit of a problem. Now we're made aware. Now we have to adjust things, so on and so forth. Now we have to do something about it. So that's an example of a non-legal time to consult an attorney. When there comes documentation, when documentation comes up, like your client signed specific documents saying that they could or could not do something, or they could or could not use something, then you got to get an attorney involved. And you yourself may not need to get an attorney involved unless how deep it is, but rather that's more onus on the client, right? So The main thing is, we're getting kind of technical here. The main thing is, again, I'm not a lawyer. I can't offer sound legal advice, but this is more actions on what to do. And if I were to signal the most important items is don't do anything. Don't do anything without consulting the client. Like, even if you want to fix something, and I'm going to go back down to this. Do not make any changes without consulting key stakeholders or client or attorneys. You don't want to do anything. Even if you're trying to fix something, I'm going to say, even if you know the solution and you can implement the solution right away, don't do it without consulting all necessary parties, as this could mess things up even more. This has happened. I've actually had a situation where a client got into some trouble. I identified a solution. I fixed the solution, but it actually made things worse. That was a crappy time. Because I didn't consult all parties, it was not a good time. It actually hindered our growth and set us back and cost more time and aggravation. So hopefully this helps, guys. I'm going to give this resource to you. You can see the link below. Again, I'm not an expert. I've just been in some situations, and I wanted to give some insight on what I've seen successful in these situations, because this is something that's not talked about. It's not glamorous. It's not fun. But doing any type of advertising, marketing, or being a digital entrepreneur and providing your own services in any regard, you're going to run into these things. So I'm struggling to keep talk here. So I'm going to let you guys go. Let me know in the comments if this helped at all. Hopefully it did. And excuse me. We'll talk soon. Thank you.